Quail Springs, Texas, 1884. Clementine Bird had spent 11 months at the Cassidy Ranch, learning the shape of a man's days, which hour he preferred his coffee, which fence line worried him most before a storm, the quiet he carried on Sundays, without ever once letting herself wonder what any of it might mean, treating the noticing itself as simply part of doing her job well. She sat beside him on the porch that evening, the horses settling in the corral below, the sky doing the slow gold thing it did over the Quail Springs hills before dark. "I had a trunk once," she said, "back in Abilene. A trunk of half-finished linen I never let myself look at again after I turned 19. She paused. "I never dreamed of love, not since. I stopped letting myself imagine it a long time ago, and I got so good at not imagining it that I'm not certain I'd recognize it if it arrived." Beau Cassidy didn't answer right away. He looked at her the way he looked at whether he was deciding whether to trust, unhurried, taking his time with it. "Well," he said finally, and something in his voice had gone warm and certain in a way she'd learned over 11 months meant he'd already made up his mind about something before he said it out loud. "Then dream with me instead." Clementine had arrived at the Cassidy Ranch 11 months back that spring, answering a posted notice for a housekeeper with practical experience and no complicated requirements, carrying one trunk and a competence at cooking and mending that had been the only inheritance her father left worth having. She'd raised 4 younger siblings, largely on her own since her mother's death, and had kept raising them through her father's long, quiet decline afterward. A man who'd never quite recovered from losing his wife, and had needed almost as much looking after, some days, as the children did. Whatever room she'd once had for dreaming ahead had narrowed steadily in the years since, until it held little more than the household's immediate needs. A full larder, a mended roof, 4 younger lives kept fed and steady. By the time her father passed, and her youngest brother married and moved away to Abilene, Clementine was 26 years old and had never once in all those years been asked what she herself might actually want out of any of it. She'd arrived at the Cassidy place on a Tuesday afternoon, trunk balanced against one hip, dust from the road still on her boots, and found Beau mending a section of corral fence himself rather than sending a hand to do it. Sleeves rolled, entirely unbothered by the dust. He'd looked up, taken in the trunk and the travel-worn dress, and asked only one question before anything else. Not about her references, not about her cooking, but whether she'd had anything to eat since morning. She hadn't. He'd walked her straight to the kitchen and set bread and butter in front of her before discussing wages at all. And Clementine had thought, watching him do it without any apparent awareness that it was unusual, that she'd rarely met a man who led with a person's hunger before her usefulness. "Most employers ask what I can do first," she told him once she'd eaten. "Figured I'd find that out soon enough regardless," Beau said. Seemed like the food mattered more right at the moment. Beau Cassidy was 32, ran the ranch alone since his own father's death 4 years back, and had hired Clementine that same Tuesday with the plain practicality of a man who needed a household managed and had already decided, somewhere between the bread and the butter, that she'd manage it well. He didn't tell her that first week that he buried more than a father on this land. A mother lost to fever when he was a boy, an older brother taken by the same influenza that had spared him, seemingly at random, the winter he turned 19. A stretch of grief that had taught him early exactly how little control a person actually had over what they were allowed to keep. There had been a woman before her, briefly, 3 years back, a school teacher from Fort Worth who'd found the ranch's isolation harder to love than she'd expected, and had left before the second winter, kindly enough, with no real fault on either side, though the leaving had still cost him something quiet he never fully spoke of. Beau had told himself, watching her wagon disappear down the road, that he preferred it that way regardless, that a man who'd already lost as much as he had was better served keeping his attachments modest, manageable, easy enough to survive losing if it came to that. He watched Clementine longer than he probably should have that first month, how she moved through a kitchen like she was managing a small army, how she never once complained about a broken hinge or a leaking roof, simply fixed what she could and made peace with what she couldn't. He noticed the small things too, that she always set his coffee down on his left, having learned within a week which hand he favored, that she never once asked him to repeat himself when he spoke quietly, simply leaned in and listened the first time. By the third month, he'd stopped pretending to himself that his attention toward her was purely practical. By the sixth, he'd stopped pretending much of anything at all, though he made up his mind, deliberately, not to say so out loud yet. Not until he was certain the watching meant what he suspected it meant, for both of them, not just for him. Every morning, Clementine rose before the sun and had coffee ready by the time Beau came in from the first check of the stock. Every morning, he thanked her the same unhurried way. Every evening, they sat on the porch for a while before she went to her room in the small house behind the main one, talking about nothing important: the weather, a sick calf, a letter from her brother in Abilene. It went on that way through summer and into autumn. Small, unremarkable Tuesdays stacking into small, unremarkable months. She learned the rhythm of his moods, the quiet he carried after visiting his family's graves on the anniversary of his mother's death, and how a good rain always seemed to loosen something in his shoulders that worry had kept tight. He learned her rhythms in turn, that she hummed while kneading bread, but never while doing anything else, that she checked the horizon twice before deciding whether to hang the wash, once from habit, and once, he suspected, simply to have a reason to stand outside a moment longer. She noticed, too, that he had a habit of finding reasons to mend things that weren't strictly broken. She caught him once from the kitchen window, replacing a perfectly serviceable rein, simply because it had crossed his mind to check it. Standing there, turning it over in his hands far longer than any actual repair required, and understood exactly what he was actually doing out there, though she never let on that she'd seen. "You checked that same fence post twice this morning," she told him dryly one evening, not looking up from the potatoes. "Once at dawn and once just now. Ranch isn't going anywhere in between." Beau had the good grace to look mildly caught out. "Fence posts need watching," he said. Clementine said, and let him keep believing she hadn't noticed exactly what he was watching for. Clementine found herself, somewhere around the 8th month, unable to entirely remember what her days had felt like before this particular rhythm had settled into them. This story's already found its way to places I never imagined when I sat down to write it. Brazil, Nigeria, India, the Philippines, corners of the world I'm only starting to learn the names of. If Clementine and Beau are keeping you good company tonight, a like helps more than you know. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Now, a boy Clementine once loved is about to walk back into this story, 7 years too late to change anything, but not too late to explain why she stopped letting herself want things at all. She hadn't always believed that about herself. There had been a boy once, before the arithmetic of her life had rearranged itself entirely around other people's needs. His name had been Gideon Marsh, the blacksmith's son from the next town over, and he'd asked to marry her when she was 19, and she'd said yes with the uncomplicated certainty of a girl who'd never yet been taught that wanting things came with a cost. This was 7 years ago now, before her mother's illness, before the 4 younger siblings needed her whole attention, before anything that came after. They'd planned a modest wedding for the following spring, and Clementine had spent that whole winter sewing what pieces of a trousseau her family's means allowed. humming to herself in a way her mother later said she'd never forgotten hearing. He'd gone to work the railroad camps that spring, meaning to save enough for a proper start before the wedding, and had written faithfully for 4 months before the letters simply stopped arriving. She'd written twice more herself, careful, uncertain letters asking whether something was wrong, and had received no reply to either one of them. The silence itself becoming its own kind of unbearable answer. She never learned exactly what became of him, not for certain. A fever moving through the camps that season, someone eventually told her, though nobody could confirm whether Gideon had been among the ones it took, or whether he'd simply moved on to some other life, without troubling to explain why. Her mother died 3 months later, and it was in the middle of that same grief that the household's full weight settled onto Clementine at once. The younger siblings, her father's decline, all of it arriving together, with barely room to properly grieve a boy who might not have even been worth grieving if he'd left of his own choosing. Rather than dying, she'd told herself in the years since that it hardly mattered which version of the story was true. Either way, she'd learned the same lesson from it, that wanting a future with someone was a fragile enough thing to build a life around, that she'd rather not build anything on it at all. She'd folded the half-finished trousseau into the bottom of her trunk and never once, in the 7 years since, taken it out to look at it again. The first hard freeze came early that year, catching half the county's stock unprepared, and Beau spent 3 days and nights moving cattle to lower pasture with barely 4 hours sleep total. A neighbor's stray herd had drifted onto Cassidy land days before the freeze hit. Hollis Reams's cattle wandered through a gap in his own fence line, and Beau had folded them into his own count without a second thought, unwilling to let another man's animals die of exposure over a boundary line, even one he had every right to ignore. Clementine thought that was foolishness the first evening she heard about it, and told him so plainly. "Hollis Reams hasn't mended that fence in 2 years," she said. "You're not obligated to save his herd along with your own, working yourself half to death over pride you don't even owe him." "Isn't pride," Beau said, setting down the coffee cup he barely touched. "Cattle don't know whose fence failed. They just know they're cold. That's a fine principle to hold on to while you're falling asleep standing up," Clementine said. "There's a difference between kindness and simply refusing to say no to anyone, Beau Cassidy." He looked at her a moment, surprised at the sharpness of it. Then something like a smile worked at the corner of his mouth, despite the exhaustion written plainly across his face. "Didn't know you had opinions about my fence line management." "I have opinions about you not sleeping," Clementine said. "The fence line's just where they landed." He didn't argue further, though he didn't stop working the extra hours either, and Clementine understood, watching him ride out again at dawn, that some arguments weren't meant to be won so much as simply spoken aloud. She kept the fire built up through those 3 nights, and the coffee always hot. "You didn't have to do all 3 days yourself," she told him the 3rd night, setting a plate down in front of him, his hand still cold despite the fire. "Didn't have anyone else to send," Beau said. "And I wasn't going to lose stock I could have saved, just because saving it cost me some sleep." "That's not the only thing you do that with," Clementine said quietly. Beau went still, understanding plainly enough that she'd said more than the sentence's words alone carried. "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She almost told him then, in the middle of that hard winter, everything she'd been carrying since Gideon Marsh, the letters that stopped, the fever that may or may not have taken him, the 7 years since she'd let herself want anything for her own sake. She got as far as sitting across from him one evening with the words half-formed, and found at the last moment that she couldn't quite finish crossing the distance between almost saying something and actually saying it. "You look like you're working something out," Beau said quietly, watching her over the top of his book. "I am," Clementine admitted. "I'm not sure I know how to finish it yet." "Take your time," Beau said. I've been patient about slower things than this." That night, alone in her small room, she took the folded trousseau from the bottom of her trunk for the first time in 7 years, unfolding it carefully in the lamplight, running her fingers over stitches she'd sewn as a girl who'd never once doubted that wanting a future was safe. She didn't cry, exactly. She simply sat with it a long while before folding it back the way she'd found it. The trunk stayed open longer than she meant it to, and by the second night, Clementine had done something she hadn't expected of herself. She'd begun, almost without deciding to, sorting which of her things she'd take if she left. It frightened her, how naturally the packing came, how quickly her hands remembered the exact motion of preparing to leave, before her heart had caught up to admit why. She told herself it was practical, only sensible, a woman keeping her affairs in order. She knew, underneath that, it was fear wearing practicality's clothes, the same fear that had once made her fold a trousseau away rather than risk unfolding a life around it again. She wrote half a letter to her sister in Abilene that night, asking whether the position at the Fenwick house was still open, whether there was still room in the spare bedroom, whether it wasn't perhaps time she came home properly instead of keeping another family's house indefinitely. Her hand had moved steadily across the page, the old practiced competence of someone who'd made difficult, practical decisions her whole life without much ceremony. She got as far as sealing it before she stopped, staring at her own handwriting, and understood exactly what she was doing, repeating, almost exactly, the shape of the decision that had cost her nothing and given her nothing for 7 straight years. Leaving before anything could be asked of her. Choosing the manageable grief of walking away over the unmanageable risk of staying and possibly losing someone again. She didn't send it. She sat with the sealed letter until the lamp burned low, and in the morning, when Beau asked if she was well, she told him the truth instead of the practiced deflection. "I nearly wrote to my sister last night," she said, meeting his eyes squarely despite the effort it cost her. "About going home to Abilene." Beau set down his coffee cup carefully. "Nearly. I got scared," Clementine said, "of exactly this, of caring enough that losing it would actually cost me something." She held his gaze. "I didn't send it." "I'm glad," Beau said, simply, without pressing further, though something in his face had gone quiet and careful in a way she recognized now as relief he wasn't yet ready to name aloud either. The freeze broke within days after that, the thaw finally settling in for good, and Clementine found him on the porch one clear evening and sat beside him without being asked. "Cattle are going to make it," Beau said. "Lost 11 head. Could have been worse." "You did everything a person could do," Clementine said. "Learned a while back that everything a person could do was usually the only thing worth doing," Beau said. "Rest is just hoping it's enough." She looked at him in the cold porch light. This man who'd buried a mother and a brother and a father, and kept working anyway, kept caring for things anyway, never once letting the losses convince him that caring wasn't worth the risk of losing again. "I think I've been wrong about something," she said slowly, "about what wanting things actually costs a person, and about what running from that cost actually saves." That was the evening she finally told him. Not everything at once, but enough. The shape of Gideon Marsh and the letters that stopped, and a 7 years of telling herself that wanting a future with someone was too fragile a thing to build a life on. She told him, too, about the letter she'd nearly sent and why she hadn't. Beau listened without interrupting, never once rushing her toward more than she was ready to give. "I never dreamed of love," she said finally, quiet enough that he had to lean in slightly to catch it. "Not as a girl, not since. I stopped letting myself imagine it a long time ago, and I got so good at not imagining it that I'm not certain I'd recognize it if it arrived." Beau didn't answer right away. He looked at her, the way he looked at whether he was deciding whether to trust, unhurried, taking his time with it. "Well," he said finally, warmth and certainty settling into his voice, "then dream with me instead. I'm not asking you to trust some grand feeling you're not sure you recognize. I'm asking you to trust 11 months of ordinary Tuesdays and a woman who almost ran from them and chose to stay instead. And however many more of them you're willing to spend finding out whether they add up to something worth calling love." She reached over and took his hand, cold from the porch air, and held it firmly, remembering, briefly, 7 years ago, that a person might hold someone else's hand when they'd finally decided the future was worth risking again. "I don't know how to dream large," she told him, her voice steadier now than it had been 7 years before, back when wanting things still came easily and cheaply. "I've spent too many years learning to want small, manageable things instead." "Those aren't small things," Beau said. "Those are the things a life actually gets built out of. I'm offering you 11 more months of ordinary Tuesdays, and then 11 more after that, for as long as you'll have me." "Then I'll have you," Clementine said firmly. Ordinary Tuesdays, near departures, and all. They married that spring on the ranch porch itself, both of them agreeing without much discussion that the porch where they'd said the truest things to each other deserved to hold this one too. Beau fumbled with his own string tie for a full 5 minutes that morning, cursing it under his breath, until Clementine finally crossed the yard and tied it for him herself, laughing openly at the sight of a grown man defeated by a strip of ribbon after everything else he'd already survived. Her sister arrived from Abilene the day before and cried through most of the short ceremony, gripping Clementine's hand afterward with both of her own and saying, voice still thick, "I told you once you'd never find anyone. I have never in my life been so glad to be wrong about something." At the small supper afterward, Hollis Reams himself stood to offer a toast. His fence finally mended that spring after 2 years of neglect, and declared to general laughter that he'd come specifically to complain his cattle had gone home from the Cassidy pasture fatter than his own hands had ever managed to keep them, and didn't know whether to thank Beau or resent him for it. Beau raised his glass back and told him plainly he was welcome to leave his fence broken any time he pleased, so long as he brought better cattle next time. Clementine kept the old trousseau in the bottom of a new trunk, no longer folded away out of grief, but simply kept, and the spring after the wedding, she finally finished it. Added the last pieces of lace she'd left undone at 19. Not to replace what she'd lost, but to complete what she'd started, on her own terms this time, in her own kitchen, with a man who never once asked her to explain more of the story than she was ready to give. I keep coming back to that trunk, half-finished linen, folded away at 19 and left untouched for 7 years, carried across every year since, as though the not looking could somehow undo the wanting that made her sew it in the first place. Some people learn early not to want things, not because they're incapable of wanting, but because wanting once cost them something they never fully recovered from, and it seemed safer afterward to simply stop asking. Clementine spent 7 years mistaking that safety for peace, when it was really only the absence of risk, right up until she found herself, one winter night, quietly packing a bag and writing a letter home, ready to repeat the very same leaving that had never actually protected her from anything at all, only delayed the ordinary business of living. She didn't send that letter. That's the whole of it, really. Not a grand declaration, just a sealed envelope left unsent, and a woman finally finishing a piece of linen she'd once been too frightened to complete. Thank you, truly, for riding with me today. Until next time, friend, keep riding.